Hey, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to the Earth Daily Agro webinar series. We'll begin here in a couple minutes, just waiting for a few others to gather. Again, welcome. Seeing several people joining here. We'll kick off here in a second. If you're planning to be at the Earth Daily Agro webinar for April, you're in the right place. I just put up the presentation, Nick, so we should be in good shape.
Okay.
Hey, Mikhail, we're live right now, so we're live and ready to go. We'll just give it one more minute here and get started. All right, it's just after 8 o'clock. I'll get going here, and for those of us still joining in, they can catch the early part on rebroadcast. But good morning. My name is Andrew Mullen. I lead marketing here at Earth Daily, and joining me today for today's webinar is Nick Ortman, who leads our key accounts team based in our U.S. office here in Minnesota, and then Mikhail, who is one of our global crop analysts hailing. Well, he's sort of kind of a nomad, so sometimes he's in Europe, sometimes in South America, but Mikhail will be part of our presentation today. For those of you who may not be familiar with Earth Daily Agro, we provide space-age data and analytics for the organizations and people who feed the planet. So we work with large growers, seed and input providers, those who lend money to agriculture, insure agriculture, those who trade agriculture in the form of commodities, and large food and beverage manufacturers. And so we provide robust data and analytics at the field, the farm, the regional level for a wide variety of crop types. In fact, today we're going to be talking in the second half of our presentation about Brazil crop at this time of year. And we also have a team of agronomists and geoanalytics experts like Mikhail and Nick, who go alongside our customers and help them, gain insights from the data and the analytics. So you may or may not know that later this year, we plan on launching a brand new constellation of satellites, 10 to be specific, with a payload of 22 spectral brands that in large part have been curated for agriculture. So beginning early next year, we'll have a whole new wealth of data to bring to our customers in the area of soil, water, advanced vegetation, and atmosphere. The aim of this series, and it's every month, usually on the first Friday. We had a little technical snafu a few weeks ago and had to reschedule April, but the first Friday of May, we'll be back, and all these are recorded, so folks can forward this to others and watch it on rebroadcast and such, and that link will be posted after today's session. But our purpose is really to be educational. Despite my little salesy pitch, this part, the lion's share of the conversation this morning will be designed to be educational. So past topics that we've had, if you want to look at them, include things around water management, soil health, deforestation. So there's many other topics you can go back and get educated on. So, but before we kind of get into the presentation today, I want to point out a few resources to you. The first is chat. The chat is active for all participants, and we encourage questions as we go here. And as the moderator, I'll interrupt Nick or Mikhail with questions as they come in. The second is we have a poll out there where I'm going to add these questions to the poll now. And please, if you have time to answer that, please do. And I'll make that live here in a second. And then I'll also make live the handouts. So we have today's presentation you can grab, as well as some more information about Earth Daily. So here.
We lost Andrew.
Am I back?
He's back.
Okay, I don't know what happened there. A little glitch with the internet this morning, but I've already done introductions. Sorry, Mikhail. I know that's Felipe, but you pinch hit it at the last minute here, and I didn't have time to update that. But we're gonna go through some, I guess, teeing up the topic, and then Nick will do the lion's share presenting about grower history, and then we'll talk a little bit about corn in the southern hemisphere. This may not be the right deck, so I'm gonna have to pivot it.
I think it is, Andrew.
Okay. So here's what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what can we learn from, the history of a field. And Nick's going to give you the how. I'm going to give you a couple whys behind where this is going and what some of our customers are doing in kind of an interesting way around using grower history. So on the left there, upper left, is, soil is the foundation of agriculture. I think that's sort of a self-evident statement, but soil health drives much of the, not all, but much of the output that in agriculture. And so deeply understanding it and its history can be incredibly valuable to doing a number of different things. Two examples that I have up here on the screen are two of our customers, Tribe in Brazil, and then the upper right is Sustainable Oils. Tribe is actually in the lending part of the equation in agriculture. And they are pioneering using grower history as a key attribute, one of 2,000 attributes that they look at in terms of underwriting and lending in agriculture. So rather than just the traditional asset-based model, they're using the grower history, the understanding of the production of the land as a basis in how they actually determine their lending. And second, what they're doing very interesting is they're using, it's not really history, but it's just an interesting little fact, is they're partnered with some of the UK grocery chains like Sainsbury's to validate that a grower is actually operating on legal land that's not on deforested land. And they're using that as a way to verify that, and they will be able to offer special financing for those that prove that, and those that also substantiate that they are using, sort of regenerative ag practices. And so our data is powering understanding of that information. And then lastly, the grocery chains ultimately are going to go the direction of being able to use Earth observation data to validate, where something is grown. Is it grown in a sustainable way? Is it grown in deforested land, and be verified at the field and farm level? On the upper right, Sustainable Oils, another anchor customer of ours. They're actually trying to propagate and deploy camelina, the growth of the camelina crop worldwide. It's a relatively new crop, at least for its purpose, with regard to use for a seed oil, right, for a replacement for diesel and soy diesel. But part of what we're doing with them is modeling and understanding at the deep level the grower history to profile where camelina can be grown most productively, and what's sort of the prescription or the formula for various growing conditions around the world based on grower history of known production as a way to help farmers and growers get into the camelina game. So there's just a couple examples of more like downstream what our customers might be using grower history for. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick, who can explain in a much more granular and scientific way how this actually works and what you do to use Earth observation and geospatial analytics in this realm. So Nick, over to you.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Well, so we're going to take a stab today at describing some of the like I would say, some of the things you can learn about a field from remote sensing that is, you with very minimal input from a user or from a grower. So, some of these things that in various parts of the world we can know more in depth or less in depth, but generally speaking, that all this type of information should be available in nearly anywhere in the world using remote sensing. So we're just going to start out with some things that you'd want to know if you were working with if you're a lender, then you're giving money to a grower to start growing or to grow their crops. If you're a producer or an agronomist trying to help somebody understand what's happening in a field, what can we just learn sort of quickly with remote sensing without needing to dive into too much data entry. So some of the questions I'll work my way through here, but just to give everybody a heads up of what's on its way. Answering questions like, what has this field grown in the past? What is the production capacity of this field? Is it a high producing, low producing field? How consistent is the field? Is it a highly variable performance? What's the performance of each part of the field? Are some parts better or worse? And what can we learn, and why would that matter? And then how does a field compare to the area around it? Is this the best field in the region, or is it the worst? Some of this kind of information that we can answer these questions. And then how could whether it's a bank or a lender or an agronomist, what type of answers could they provide moving forward to help with better decision making? So starting off, just talking, like I said, this is another kind of breakdown of what we can use with this information, right? So foundational field data is what I'm going to call it. Things like the crop rotation, performance, and subfield characteristics, and then regional comparisons, and then how a lender or an insurance company could use all this data to aggregate and really understand what the risk levels and performance levels are throughout their entire portfolio. So starting off with the foundational field data of crop rotation. So this is something that most available in the US, but also something that we can do in various parts of the world, where when we take a look at a field, we can use in the United States, the USDA provides something called the cropland data layer, which you can see in the yellow and green examples I selected there in the images on the right. What the cropland data layer shows is it's a past history of what crop was grown within each polygon or field border in a region. And this is something that, like I said, the USDA delivers in the US, but or the agro and other providers are able to use remote sensing to be able to do crop ID and build these layers as well. So we can have this historical background of what was the land use in this particular field year over year over year as we go into the past. So when you're, as Andrew had mentioned, this is something in Brazil as an example, where we want to take a look at a piece of land and say, is this land always been cropped, or did it used to be forest? And if it was forest, when was it forest, right? Or did it move from if we look at this year or last year, it was crop, but the previous 5 years it was pasture, and the previous 5 years before that it was forest. We can sort of build that portfolio of what is the history of this field. If it's in a other production area and you just want to see, so in this case, in my area, I'm located currently in Iowa. And this is an example from the state of Iowa where we can see that, okay, here is the rotation on this field, corn, soybeans in past seasons. But we can identify that information about the field just by simply providing a polygon saying, this is my field of interest. With that also comes one of the services we do on our side, not to get too salesy again, but another thing we can do by looking at this past crop rotation of a field. When we say, here's my field, and we deliver, here's what the past crop rotation is, we also have based on that rotation, here's our predicted crop for that field for the current season. So even though nothing is planted at that point in time in the field, we can anticipate, well, based on rotation, it's most likely that this field is going to be corn or soybeans or cotton or wheat or whatever the next thing in the rotation typically is. And then on the remote sensing side, once we see a crop stand develop within the current growing season, we're able to run a crop ID update and basically say, okay, we thought it was going to be corn and it is in fact corn, or we thought it was going to be corn, but actually it ended up being soybeans grown in this field. So we can use that sort of foundational component about a field without needing to get the full data collection and have growers bringing, their USB drive from the planter tractor in. We can just simply do some remote sensing and understand what was grown and what is growing. The next thing I'm going to kind of base, and for those of you that probably joined this meeting before, some of this might be very obvious, but for those of you that are new, I'm going to base a lot of this next discussion around talking about vegetative history and NDVI, so the ratio of big healthy plants, basically. So, and looking at over a time series. So as we see in this example, a corn crop, as the crop begins to grow, our NDVI increases. And the longer that an NDVI gets to a high peak biomass and stays that way for a longer time, has a high correlation to high yield. So using this sort of time series is something that we often use to better understand a field and how well it performs and how it performs if it's a soybean crop versus a corn crop versus a wheat crop. So this is a key analytic component that on our side, we're processing this data every single day and delivering these time series for every pixel or every group of pixels into a field that we're monitoring. So if we take a look at something like this is actually an example from my farm in Iowa. We take a look at this case, we're looking at the history of my farm, and using that crop history, we're able to determine these are the last 4 years in which we grew corn on this field. And by looking at this vegetative curve of this field, we can clearly understand some things about what the past crop was. So by looking at going back to the red, 2017, we got off to a good early start, stayed healthy for a long period of time, and had a very high yield of 250 bushels per acre. The next year, 2018, we got off to a normal good start, maybe a tad bit late, but then we just never reached a peak biomass, and we finished our season early, where we had a very sub-poor performance of 132 bushels per acre. Versus in 2020, just to add on, got off to our normal good early start, stayed very strong, but died down a bit earlier than we did in 2017, resulting in a 220 bushel an acre yield. And in the 2022 season, we could see we got up to a moderately late start, but we got to a very high biomass, and we stayed there for a very long time and produced our record yield for that field. But what this is showcasing to us is that we can understand by, even if the grower never provided any yield information and no specifics, but just said, hey, here is my field, we could already pretty quickly say, okay, here's my field. Okay, here's the years that it grew corn, which is what you want to grow again this year in 2024. And what was the performance history? Looks like you've had one poor year, two pretty good years, and one kind of in the middle, right? So as a lender or an insurer, we could kind of understand a little bit about what's happening on this grower's fields without needing full in-depth, discussion with the grower on a field-by-field basis. So what that allows us to do then is to build analytic. Go ahead.
Not to interrupt you, I just got a question in the chat here, and I think this is as good a time of any for you to address this one. So Anupam from Bangladesh wants to know about weather data and how that factors into this. And specifically, he's wondering, can you use weather data or weather reports 3 to 4 months before sowing seeds to help you? And how might that work?
So so a good way to think of that, and if this is, let me take my farm for a clear example here. So once I understand, so there's two things in our platform. You can dive into this. I don't have it in depth in the screenshots, but I'd be more than willing to do a demo sometime to showcase this. But what we're looking at here is the vegetative answers, but we can also bring in the weather history and see sort of weather on a time series. So I can answer very clearly in this particular case, the reason that we had such poor crop in 2018 in my part of the world is because we had a very excess amount of moisture in the early growing stages of the crop, which caused us to lose a lot of nitrogen and in fact drowned out even portions of the field. And 2022 and 2017 were historically dry years for my particular farm. And that is as a result, because we have these heavy black soils in this part of Iowa, the historically dry years, as long as they don't get too dry, can be high performing. So we are able to learn a little bit about why this field performed, why it did. So then if you were to take if I was an agronomy producer and I would say, hey, the next kind of 3-month forecast is that the Midwest is going to be drier or wetter than normal, I may want to take some management decisions because I know how my farm, or I know how this grower's farm is going to perform under those circumstances. So we do not have sort of a suggestive service that says, just so you know, this field is in a dry area, and typically when it's dry, it performs well, or vice versa, whatever. But we do have access to that data so that professionals that are using tools like ours or using this data can sort of put their local expertise on, okay, I know I've heard this forecast. We are not, 3-month, 4-month forecasters. That's not something that we do. But reading the data we have and understanding the history of the field is something you could do in our tool.
Yeah, maybe the only thing I would add, Nick, is that a lot of our clients are intermediaries where they have an agronomy team and are advising the grower. So they use our data and other data sources to provide that prescription, for lack of a better term. But I love the example that you gave about how to use historical data as building a proxy for what the conditions like it are. So thank you, Nick.
Yeah. So using that principle in mind of understanding that vegetative development to really get an idea of, no, it's not exact yield data, but it's as close as we can get without grower inputs. We can then take that as a proxy to build how good is a field or a grower versus another. And when we look at the year-over-year vegetation, we can understand which fields are historically higher or lower producing based on how much vegetation they're developing over the year. So in this example, we could see a grower and understand that, okay, this is all the fields for that grower. We can see some of these fields in the green have a higher production potential, and some of those in the red have a lower. Or if I'm a lender and I can take a look at the chart in the bottom right, which shows sort of a distribution of all the fields that I'm currently lending to, which one of them are the sort of lower producing historically versus the higher producing fields historically, and understanding that grower history, again, by just simply saying, here's where my customers' fields are. So here's a little bit of a breakdown of what I mean. And this chart might not be the easiest thing to read in the end, but when we look at the chart on the left, this is what we would consider our lower producing field. And yeah, this is kind of a little bit tougher to see. But you can see the fields kind of max out at about a 0.85 NDVI is about as high as they ever get, as opposed to this field over here. Mostly every year it's up over 0.9. It's producing high levels of vegetation and staying there for that long time. So we can see, looking at this field, while they both produce a crop and they both just do just fine, one just more consistently puts up that sort of higher level vegetation for that longer period of time. And we've seen that to be more highly correlated with yield. So therefore, we would classify the field on the right as having a higher production capacity than the class on the left. Now, we don't exactly have a fully developed yield model for every place in the world to say this is what this cornfield is going to yield or that soybean field is going to yield. But oftentimes our customers will use this data history plus their own local knowledge, their own local data sets to sort of tune, take a foundational yield model that we would have and tune it to their area with their data source. The next thing we want to call out a little bit too is the consistency. So oftentimes in lending or insurance, we'll insure based off of the average production that a field has produced in the past. And just knowing the average of a field doesn't necessarily tell you whether it's a risky field to insure or lend to, or it's steady and stable and pretty much guaranteed that the guy is going to produce a good crop. So with that, we have an analytic that we call, the risk score. So if we look at this example, great example we ran into with one of our customers in years past, where they had two fields that had the exact same APH as an acronym we use here in the US from insurance. It's actual production history. Both of these fields have the same 200 bushels per acre APH. However, I think everybody looking at this can just look at that chart real quickly and say, those are very different ways to get to that total, right? The one on the right pretty much is all 190 to 210. steady as he goes, just produces corn over and over, same thing. The one on the left has got some 250s and some 150s in the mix, right? Where he had some great years and some poor years. And not that either of these growers are doing anything wrong, but from a lending and insurance standpoint, quick and easy way to know, all right, this guy's one we might want to consider a little bit more different. This one's a safer bet, right? We're okay with our debt to asset ratios being a little bit more risky on the grower on the right because he's a pretty stable producer. The one on the left, there's a lot of different variables that may cause this, so we can understand, again, to go back to the previous, those 2 bad years were really bad years in this case because it prevented plant in the US and late planting and too much moisture. So if I've got a forecast of a dry season and this guy is very risky because when he's in wet years, he's bad, I don't care. If it's the other way around and this guy is an non-irrigated and it's going to be dry, then you know what to do. And as a local lender, you can make some decisions. But having a quick history to just say field A versus field B, which one, or grower A versus grower B, which one is steady as it goes and which one is up and down and all over the place. Next, moving on. So once you have a field that you're interested in looking into, we can also identify a lot of performance within the field and variability of, is this just a steady field or is this a field that has some very poor spots and some very good spots? So when we look at a field like this, a quick, simple, here's the field border, and then we can provide, here's a history of what this field looks like. So down on the bottom here, looking at the just as a quick example, so the 2 green and red maps on the left are vegetative maps from previous seasons, where we can see there's sort of some issues in a few spots of the field that typically underproduce, but not every year. You go to the second one, you can see it's a pretty uniform, good field some years. Then we move to the next one along, and quickly we can understand the why, right? The dark green is the lower elevation, and if you remember what I told you before, we struggle from excess moisture. So on a field like this, the bottom left corner can get very wet and underperform some years. The top left corner, it's hit and miss, I guess, right? As we can see, some years it's worse, better or worse. And then we also have the soil type map as the last one there, which is a layer we have available in the US. But with all this pieces of information pulled together, then we can sort of understand kind of a management zones, if you will, in the top right, an example of a process. Here's the border, here's the history, here's the soil and elevation makeup. And as a result, here's sort of the zones that perform the same year over year in the top right. So this is something that's when the user does want to get down in the weeds. Now, if you're a lender giving money to hundreds of growers, you're probably not going to go field by field and dive into what's going on within a field. But as an insurance company or an agronomy service provider, this type of information is definitely valuable, where you can sit down with that grower and have an in-depth conversation about, hey, this is, as an agronomist, this is a field I have never seen. As a farmer, I know you know it. Well, here's the data that's available to me to help me help you. And you can start those conversations very clearly of, this is what we've happened in the past. Tell me why the bottom left of this field is underproducing some years, and then the farmer's probably going to have their story. With that, also, one of the things in the fintech side of things, and specifically insurance, that comes along a lot is a grower might provide and say, here are my fields that I would like to insure. And you say, okay, great, this is a 154-acre field in South Dakota that I'd like to buy some insurance on, and an insurance company doesn't know anything about that field necessarily. First year, the grower comes in and complains and says, hey, 70 acres of this field, I was not able to plant a crop this season, so I need an insurance payment. Well, quickly and easily with remote sensing, we can take a look and say, all right, so that part of the field that is shown in the bottom left here in the red, that was all areas that unsuccessfully produced a crop. So, okay, Mr. Grower, you do not have any crop there. Well, but let me take us a step farther and look back in the previous seasons. Have you ever grown a crop in that area? And we can come back and see the four maps on the right are the previous 4 seasons. Areas highlighted in red are areas that A simple algorithm of ours shows that these parts of the field didn't produce a successful crop during that part of that season. So as a result, we've classified 41 of those 77 acres that just did not produce a crop ever in the last 4 years. So therefore, there's no reason for you to have been paid out an insurance claim on 40 of those 70 acres for unsuccessfully producing a crop this current season. I see there was a question in the chat about the smallest farm size you work with.
Let me see if I can take that one. So many of our customers actually provide advisory services to the grower. So in a case where it's an individual farm, they're most likely better served by one of our customer partners that provide that agronomy service. Buying analytics or data set at an individual farm level, unless it's fairly reasonable size, right? It's not necessarily cost of value, right, and at the individual farm level per se. So Nick, you can add to that, but that would be my initial response.
Yeah, just we tend to be more on the B2B side, right? Where if it's a local, if you're a 100,000 hectare farmer in Kazakhstan, we often work directly with those. But if you're a 100 hectare small farmer, you're probably better to find a local agronomy service or something like that is subscribed to our offer. And if they haven't, obviously suggest them that they could or should, right?
Yeah, perfect.
Yep. So we're working with the large scale or the B2B side. So this is another example about understanding that field history, and especially from a fintech side of things where you don't really get into the weeds, but hey, I want to make sure that I'm not paying something that I shouldn't on an insurance claim. In the US, this is a relatively common problem to have areas of the country that don't necessarily produce every year if we're excess moisture. So having that quick and easy check is really a good way to improve performance. So for the next thing moving on then is with this, as I mentioned before, I can take a look and see how a particular field is performed compared to itself. But also, as Mikhail shows, when he does more of our large scale regional analytics, we're also providing regional data or the same type of data, but aggregated to an entire region. So I can take a look and see how a particular field of mine has performed, or a customer's field has performed against the rest of the county. So in some cases, when we're doing lending, you're like, okay, I'm lending in Palo Alto County, Iowa. Palo Alto County, Iowa tends to have an average yield of X value. Is this grower that I'm giving money to, is he above the mean or below the mean on his typical production, right? If I'm using county averages for all of my figures, but this guy's underproducing and he's in the bottom half of the county, that might put me in a troublesome spot. If they're up in the top, that might make me much better off. Fortunately, our side of the county tends to be the higher producing side. The Southwest is a little bit lower producing. So fortunately for us, we're typically producing above and better production than the rest of the county. But having this analytics and understanding that quick field history, again, here's a field border, here's all the information we can know about it as we're trying to understand our risks. And one other thing to call out on this, that's something that's a little bit unique, is in this case, I have gone through this field and taken a look specifically at the corn seasons. And in the same thing, as we're looking in the county regions, we also apply crop mass, where we're taking a look at the pixels within each county that are applied to a specific crop. So obviously, as we look at the shape, if you will, of these two different curves, a corn crop or corn vegetative curve does look different than a soybean curve. So it's very important where we can that we're really unifying and saying, hey, this corn is better than this corn, or this soybeans is better than this soybeans. In other parts of the world where we don't have this depth of data, we're monitoring just all of the crop vegetation pixels, but we're not necessarily looking at specific pixels of each crop, which still does provide value. It's just in some of these other areas where we need to get even more precise. Having that crop mask is much better.
Hey, Nick, it's interesting, just reading the polls here, that about half of our audience actually is using geospatial analytics, a little less than half, about 45% today.
Mhm.
And then of that group, only about 44% actually is using grower history to inform their decisions. So just interesting sort of
Sure.
reported facts from our audience here.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that grower history, often you think of data collection, making the growers provide something to you as far as yield histories and things like that. And it's a very difficult thing, even if they want to, right? Even from my side as a farmer, even if I wanted to work with an agronomist and give him my in-depth information, if I was starting anew, it'd be very hard to do, right? I've been doing it for quite a long time at that level, so it's easier for me. But if you're going into a newer grower that's maybe not as tech savvy, it's very difficult to start. And that's where something like this is a great way to start. Point one, like, hey, you don't, all we need to know is where your field is, and we'll just get a starting base. And then moving forward, then we can start, building on and providing new information to really derive those services. So this is sort of that, hopefully gets over some of that barrier to entry of, if you walk into a grower and say, hey, give me 10 years of field history, they're just be like, all right, how about 0? But if you're like, hey, we have, 80% of the knowledge just using remote sensing, let's take that and have it as our starting point and then just build, right? That makes the pill a lot easier to swallow.
Yeah, just do a checkpoint. We're a little bit past halfway and you're a little bit behind.
Sorry, I'm actually heading into my last.
The more questions, the better. The more questions, the better.
No, it's good. But I'm just kind of heading in again to wrapping my side up, right? So when we look at the field history and we understand what's, what we can learn on a grower's field without massive input, and what type of decisions can depend on who you are as a business, but understanding things like the crop rotation, productivity, consistency, subfield characteristics, and how it compares to the region really is going to start setting up some of those, again, if it's high level information where I've got 1,000 growers and I want to know which ones are the ones I can just not worry about, or which ones are my high producers, my low producers. Using this type of information is a really great way to do that first step of understanding and comparison. So yeah, sorry to go over for you.
No, you're fine. I was just going to say, anyone else in the audience there that would like to ask questions of Nick, please do that now, or we can come back to it at the end. But so just drop those in the chat. We're going to pivot here a little bit to Mikhail. Actually, Nick and Mikhail are on the same team. And while Nick provided some foundational knowledge about how to use grower history and analysis, Mikhail is going to talk about some real-time, near-time information about like how you use geospatial analytics to draw insights about what's going on in Brazil. So Mikhail, over to you.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Okay, so hello everyone. I said I'm Mikhail Atiak, a group analyst in Earth Daily. And what I will try to show you is how to use, for an example, illustrate a little bit how to use the data to concretely know what's going on in some part of the world. And in this case, we will talk more about the corn production in Brazil. We'll talk about several topics, but for example, some of them, we will maybe talk a little bit about La Nina phenomenon, like in a lot of parts of the world, El Niño, La Niña have some impact on how the crops are going. We will also see a little bit what are the conditions since the beginning of the Safrinha corn season, the second corn season. That's what is really the hot spot, the hot topic right now in Brazil. We will give our opinion about if the crops are going well, and what we should still look in the next weeks and months to follow up the corn cycle. So let's go with the first slide, La Nina impact on South America. So I'm showing you on the map, you can see some of the, by the way, for some of you that don't really are familiar with La Nina, what it is, just one sentence, it's a big weather phenomena that impact the weather and lead to some anomaly in the weather in different parts of the world. And South America is specifically impacted by this kind of phenomena. And in this case, La Nina lead in general as you can see on the map, with some cool temperatures, low temperatures in some parts of South America, generally more in the north of South America, for example, Colombia or Venezuela, but also can happen in Brazil. And it is a little bit the case, it was at least at the end of last year. But more interesting, and we will talk more about that, it can lead also to some dry pattern in the south of Brazil that also can go a little bit northern, and then impact part of the corn area. As you can see, we show you a little map in the central part of the slide that is showing you the big states important for the second corn. So in Brazil, you have a first corn that is planted more or less, let's say, in October and go until February. And after, you have the second corn, what they call safrinha, second season, which go from February to, let's say, July. And it is the most important cycle. You grow about 2/3, like let's say 66% of your corn at this moment. So you see, we have the central and the southern part of Brazil that are key, and those parts were a little bit impacted by dry. That's for the introduction about La Nina. Let's go now more about what really happened. So as you can see on the first slide, we have the precipitation compared to average for the, let's say, first half of March until March 20. And what we can see is all the brown area. So you see in the central part of Brazil, we observe some below average precipitation. So the start of the season was a little bit dry. It could have been due to La Nina, as we were talking about. It may be one of the effects. And at the beginning of the cycle, you generally are not over worried about this kind of dry pattern because your water needs are not very high. But it's important at some point to receive some rain. And as you can see in the second slide, we quickly, in the end of March, receive some precipitation in some states, some very key states. You see one of the big ones. If I come back here, you see that we add up. Let me show you the important state. Mato Grosso over here is a key one. After you have Mato Grosso do Sul just below, and Paraná. That are the three we will talk a lot during this webinar. So if I come back up in the other slide, you see here Mato Grosso, the biggest one, that received some precipitation during the end of March. So that was a relief and definitely lead to good development of the crops, as we will see. But we still had some concern at this moment for Paraná over here and southern part of Mato Grosso do Sul. So about 30% of your corn was still exposed to a dry pattern at this moment. But what happened is in April, first part of April, so in the last weeks, we finally got some rain in those parts too. So big question is it too late? Is the rain happen too late? Or will that be enough to, let's say, save, to improve significantly the yield potential in this part? That's what we will answer in the second, in two slides. But first, let's resume what we saw here with the soil moisture. When it's basically orange, that means you have low soil moisture. You have the soil moisture of the last 15 days here. And as you can see again, in southern part of Mato Grosso and in Paraná, it was low. And thanks to the rain that we received in the last days, when you're looking what is coming for the coming days, we have now high soil moisture in this part too. By the way, not the more important thing, but let's keep that in mind. We also see some kind of dryness growing in the eastern part of Safrinha. Anyway, at this point, we are very happy about the way the situation improved in this part of Brazil, but something to monitor at some point. Maybe in some weeks, it could be a topic. But right now, we are happy. We received some rain. And so let's see how the crops are reacting to that. First thing first, Mato Grosso. We were talking about this one. It's the key state for the production about half of the production is done there for safrinha corn. And what we see here, we have a map of the NDVI. So again, it is a way to, as Nick explained before, a way to see how the crops are going, what is the vigor of the crops and the stage. And what we see here is the fact that on the curves, so first thing first, we had a very early cycle. You see how the curves increase faster than any curves in the last years. So that's something generally you consider as a good point, because you will be able to enjoy the rain before the dry season, which start in general in May, June. So that's the first thing. Early season, good for Mato Grosso. And you see we have a high peak. So far, so good. You see here the soil moisture. Soil moisture is quite high, higher than average. So same thing here for Mato Grosso, all great. Let's go now about Paraná. Remember, early season of Paraná was quite dry. And we see that here in these curves, soil moisture, look how low was the soil moisture. That's a black line for the current season. It was quite low. And we have this improvement in the very latest day. So the question again, was it enough to impact the crops? And what we see is during the early part of the cycle, crops were able to hold on. Really, we don't see a collapse in the NDVI value. So in this part, we will be like, yeah, it's not great to have a little bit dry early season, but is that have impacted, the crop season in Paraná? Our answer is no. And even you see that in the very latest days, we had a very good reaction of the crop, most likely due to the rain we received very recently. So in Paraná, also all good. Last point will be about Mato Grosso do Sul. This one, it's in the south of Mato Grosso. And as you can see, same question here. We received low precipitation at the beginning of the cycle. Is that enough to impact the crops or not? In this case, we see that we don't see a collapse at the beginning. It was just okay value. So we were optimistic in Paraná. For Mato Grosso do Sul, it's more like okay start of the season. But now that we receive some precipitation, we also see some improvement. So we may have from average to good yield potential for Mato Grosso do Sul. So that's a way again to analyze a little bit if the dryness is always a bad thing, let's say, but sometimes it doesn't really impact that strongly the yield. And we have 3 examples here. In Mato Grosso, no impact at all because it was too short. In Paraná, almost no impact because crops were able to hold on. And in Mato Grosso do Sul, a moderate impact, let's say. So to conclude those elements, we have basically different players, let's say USDA, CONAB, that are trying to analyze this element and provide some yield forecast. We see in this case that USDA and CONAB have 2 different scenarios. CONAB is quite pessimist, let's say, or at least have a moderate optimism. They consider that it's not great what's going on. And USDA is definitely considering a good yield this season. So you have some question. Again, we were talking about is the early planting in Mato Grosso will be finally something that will increase the yield potential. The dryness, what is the impact of that? And with the data I had to show you, normally you already have kind of the answer about who I should follow, more a USDA scenario or more a CONAB scenario. So I stopped the suspense. And definitely for us, based on the different elements I was showing you, we are considering a scenario far closer to USDA, including having a positive bias on the USDA figures, because I said it, very good situation in Mato Grosso, good water situation in Paraná and Mato Grosso do Sul now, because we had a recent improvement. And we still have some questions, basically. Possibly remember, I was telling you about this growing dryness in the east. Will that impact at some point the national production? You can also consider that maybe with the water that we will continue to see more increase in the yield potential. Or also, if you continue to have a lot of rain, at this point, at some point, maybe it will have some impact, negative impact on the crops, leading to some disease issue. So that's some question we still have for the coming days. And I show you, sorry, Andrew, I'm finishing with that. Just you have here a link with one of the reports that we are releasing, which is called the World in 10. And this one is for free. It's a last week World in 10. And that's the kind of report we will answer to those questions in the coming weeks and more.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I saw a few people leave the webinar because they're going to go put a futures order in on hedging corn from Brazil. Yeah, I mean, these gentlemen that presented today, Nick and Mikhail, are part of our expert service team. And as I mentioned early on, we sell our data, we sell our analytics and provide them, but probably our secret weapon is our expert service team, because they know geospatial analytics and they know agronomy. Nick is actually, he wasn't joking, he's dialing in from his family farm, preparing to plant right now. So these guys kind of live and breathe it. As part of your registration to this series, Mikhail, we're enrolling them all in the World in 10 report, which is our public report. So thanks for calling that out. Also in the chat, I put a couple links to both our ag series of webinars, but also for those of you that might be interested in other use cases outside of agriculture, our parent company, Earth Daily Analytics, has a webinar series in the middle of the month where you can register for that and actually learn about mining and maritime and methane and fire forest protection, all kinds of interesting use cases for outside of agriculture. Don't forget to download today's presentation from the handout section, as well as a little one-pager on us, and you are registered for the series. So each Friday you'll be invited to the next topic. I don't know, Nick, did we decide on our topic for May yet? It'll be posted pretty soon, but it'll be the first Friday in May. And we hope to see you back, and we hope that you have a great weekend. Last chance for anyone to jump in with a question. I know, sorry, your full name is not here. And you asked a question about, polycropping or monoculture crops, and Nick did put an answer in the chat for you there. It is possible, more complicated for us to do, but certainly possible. So it just depends. If you have any other questions, you can follow up with us all. Our contact information, at least LinkedIn, is in the initial part of the presentation, or you can message us or email us here. And we appreciate your time this morning and this afternoon, wherever you are around the world. And we hope to see you in May. Thanks again to my colleagues, Mikhail and Nick, for a great presentation this morning. Hopefully you learned something more about how you might be able to use grower history in a number of different ways. And then I love always ending with like data that just happened, right? So Mikhail, great snapshot on what's going on in corn in Brazil at the moment. And I always like when we're ahead of the USDA and CONAB. I mean, the great thing about Earth observation and geospatial analytics is you can look at it every day and you don't have to wait for the report. So you can start your thought process from the beginning to the middle to the end, and then see how close you are or how close we are in our opinion around the USDA and CONAB and others. So appreciate you guys, and have a wonderful weekend, bon weekend, everyone. And we'll see you again next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.